My name is Bryan Moss. Welcome to CXC. Can we give a round of applause real quick for John Jennings?
Thank you.
So this is going to be like a family affair because John and I go back a very long time.
Yeah, it's been a while, man.
Yeah, what's going on, brother? Now, the funny thing, John, I was going to message you the other day. So on Facebook has memories where you can look back, and yours popped up 11 years ago.
Wow.
John Jennings was at CCAD with Victor. It was you and Stacy. That's when I first met you guys.
Yeah. I remember this.
Yeah, and you guys were talking about the Black Kirby
Yep.
experience in the exhibition and stuff. So the conversation today is about adaptations in books.
Yeah.
But that made me think of actually, John. Oh yeah. By the way, John has a illustrious background. If you're in the room, you probably know what it is. So, we can get into those things, but I'm going to sprinkle that through the conversation. But, Eisner winning. I don't, e- so many colleges, so many people he has impacted. But I'm just really excited to get this information out. So we'll sprinkle that in along the way, and you can help me with that, John.
Okay.
So 11 years ago when I met John, he was presenting the Black Kirby, which is this profound idea and I consider that almost like an avant-garde adaptation or adaptation of something. Because when I was going through and thinking about everything, we know the books that we're going to talk about,
Right.
but this was like pretty profound to me. So, John, can you go into a little bit about the Black Kirby process and that experience and how that began, all the above?
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming to hear me yammer away, because you could be on the floor buying awesome comics and you're here. Thank you. So as Bryan was saying, I remember that first talk. I want to say me and Stacy drove down from Buffalo.
Wow, that is true, yeah.
Because at the time, I think like Stacy was still like Stacy Robinson, by the way, who's now a professor of illustration and graphic design at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And Stacy is a very close friend, best friend of mine. And, we met years ago online when there was still this thing called, I think it was called Hero Talk. And it was part of the, it was an online Black superhero museum kind of thing. It was created by Omar Bilal like years and years ago. And so they would have like a message board and when there was such things, right? And we would talk to each other. And so what ends up happening is we were posted up at OnyxCon in Atlanta, and we actually got a chance to talk for like all day, and we feel like we had a lot of stuff in common. So Stacey and I became like really fast friends. At the time, he was still living in North Carolina, and he ends up becoming my grad student at University of Buffalo many years later. And so we were having this conversation about Jack Kirby's legacy, about the MCU, and the fact that the MCU had made like a ton of money. I think the Avengers had just hit $1 billion worldwide. That's the first Avengers movies. And we're like, man, and then of course around the same time, Jack Kirby's family was kind of suing for remuneration, even though Jack Kirby's work, as you know, was work for hire, which means that, Marvel owned everything and that he had been paid for his work, that kind of stuff, right? Which is one of the reasons why he left and went to go to DC and start, Fourth World and all this kind of stuff. So we're like, man, that's messed up, because we're thinking about the idea of like, well, this is the difference between like what's legal and what's just, because sometimes those are two different things,
Right.
And, the fact that Stan Lee was a close friend of Jackson, I was like, man, I wish he would have looked out for him a little bit better, And I was like, yeah, they treating that brother like he Black. And jokingly so, right? And then Stacy was like, yeah, man, he should be called Black Kirby.
Yeah.
And we were like joshing about it at first, right? But then we were like, wait a minute, that's actually a really interesting idea, because obviously Kirby was borrowing from a lot of different cultures. He was a collage artist, he was a remix artist in his own right, And we're like, what? So we created like what we didn't know at the time, a design fiction, almost like an alternative dimension where like, what if Jack Kirby was actually like a Black man creating work from not necessarily like a Norse or like Greek, or Greco-Roman background, like Thor or what have you. What if he was coming from a West African sensibility? And if you think about it too, this is like 1960s, so it's like we're talking about the Black Power struggle, civil rights struggle, but also, the politics of the time. You know, we thought it was interesting, like for instance, that Black Panther came out like what 3 or 4 months before the Black Panther Party called themselves that. You know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And even though it's kind of a retcon, I mean, the idea of like Magneto, you know, being like Malcolm X and all these different things, right? So we're like, okay, let's make these connections more explicit. And so we ended up creating a avatar that we both use called Black Kirby that we make work through. So it was kind of like a shared avatar. So and it would drive museologists crazy, by the way. They were like, who did this work? Oh, Black Kirby did it.
Yeah.
It's kind of a joke. But it would be both of us. Or it would be just me, but we would both use the sign. And then what happened is we started to become like more of a network. And then of course at the same time, Afrofuturism as a space becomes something that was marginalized. It starts to move more to the center, you know, particularly after Black Panther, the film came out, and also like, you know, Get Out and things like that. So you actually have a shifting of like, you know, Black speculative narratives becoming like more centralized in popular media, right? And so all these things work together. We just celebrated like 10 years of working as Black Kirby. We had a 10th anniversary show like last year. And before you know it, we were doing like a lot of art direction. We were working for like, you know, dance companies, you know, as designers, stuff like that. It was really, and we've, you know, shown work all over the world at this particular point. So, yeah, so that's kind of like the background. And then, and also cool, we extend into Motherbox, which you were a part of, right? So Motherbox becomes, which is, you know, also like tagging a Jack Kirby creation, which is from the Fourth World Saga. That became the name of the studio, you know, so. Anyway, and so then we started being able to like create these large shows, you know, all over the world, all over the nation, you know, with a contingent of like dedicated artists who are working, you know, kind of like-minded. You know, so yeah.
And the amalgamation of all that is your son.
Yes,
he carries the name, right?
Yeah. My son's name is Jackson Kirby.
Yeah.
But it's Jaxon. Yeah. It's spelled Jaxon because my grandfather Albert couldn't read or write. He signed his name with an X. And so we thought like it'd be a clever way to name him after my grandfather by putting an X in the middle of his name. Yeah, so
that's beautiful.
Yeah, he's a bundle. He's 4 right now, so it's a lot of energy.
Yeah. So you brought up. I want to stick with this for a second.
Yeah.
Because the idea of it, because to see it evolve through time, over that decade. I would say there was a few points that I recall that were really vivid, that were amazing conceptually, whereas like a barbershop was part of an exhibition.
Yeah. That was the Luke Cage exhibition. So when I moved out to California, so I was at University of Buffalo. Then I went to Cambridge for about a year or so. I had a fellowship at Harvard there, and then after that, I actually moved to UC Riverside, University of California Riverside. And there's a space there called the Culver Art Center, and it's owned by the university, but it's a forward-facing, like, you know, community outreach kind of center. So it's like really it's situated in the community, and so, you know, they have like a kind of like a what do you call it, a gallery that's facing the street, like a street side gallery, and it's called I think it's called a C-Stop Gallery or something like that, and so we actually started doing collaborations with them, you know. And so at the time, I think the Luke Cage show had just finished up. And we were thinking about Luke Cage, the character from Marvel, as like an amalgamation of stereotypes, but also ideas around like Black masculinity in the Marvel universe, you know, and how he's always changing, even though he's like steel hard, right? His different iterations change according to what's going on in society, you know. I don't even remember like the kind of hardcore like 50 Cent version of him that came out, you know, with like, I think that
Richard
Corbin drew it. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, stuff like that, where he's always become like a stand-in for Black men in the Marvel universe, because he's the first African-American superhero with his own book. Right? Okay. Yeah, and so we were like, So we actually had this idea called Uncaged Hero for Hire instead of like Hero for Hire, you know? And so we created this idea called the Illibus, an illustrated syllabus. So the idea is like, you know, if you walk into the space, you can actually read the images as a type of text, you know? And so we would code things, you know, in the show, but we also have prompts, like weekly prompts installed into the show. So if you're, if you're a pedagogue of some kind, teacher, you come into that space, you'll see like, oh, wait a minute, this is a class. You know, so we had all our books, all the stuff that we had installed into the space. And so you walk in there, you're like, wait, okay, this is cool, but I can teach this. You know, I can teach this as a class. And so you can actually integrate that into like a media studies program or something like that. And so we started doing that, and then we did the next one about Candyman. It was called Reflection Eternal, named after the hip hop group. And so we would always have a soundtrack. Like so.
Oh, that's great.
So Uncaged was a Yasin Bey, like Mos Def, you know, soundtrack. Second was Kanye, actually. And just because I wanted somebody that was connected to Chicago because of Candyman, you know, that kind of stuff. And the third one was, it was called Fear of a Black Planet. And it was Larry Fuller's Eben character that he created in 1970. So, but that was also our 10th year. So that's been a partnership that we've been building off of. Our next show there is going to be called Whatever Happened to Dino Woman.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if you want me to tell you more about it.
No, go
it's a clever,
it. Yeah,
okay.
go to it.
This is a deep cut, man.
Yeah, that's what I said.
So how many people familiar with Good Times, the TV show Good Times from the 1970s? Yeah, exactly. Dynamite. Exactly. Exactly. Right? And so that's JJ, right? What was JJ's profession? What did he do? Y'all remember?
I thought he was still in high school, but he did art.
Yeah, he did art. He was art, but he grows up. You know, he actually ends up working at an ad agency. No, and so the thing with Jimmy Walker is that, you know, he becomes kind of a problematic figure because he does have some of the stereotypical notions of like a coonish behavior and stuff like that. He becomes like more central. The seriousness of the original show. That's why John Amos left the show, actually, because he didn't like how the portrayals were happening.
Did he become like the Urkel?
Yeah, he became the Urkel of, he was the Urkel, exactly. Where he becomes more like not necessarily a good representation of blackness on television. But he was, but what happened though is that he was an entrepreneur. He was always trying to make money. So he was an artist. He was a very good artist too. He was trying to get patrons, right? He started a greeting card company. I don't know if you remember that.
You're talking the character, not
the character. Yeah. The same. You know, to me, it's the same person. I'm kidding. Yeah, but the character. Yeah, the character was an interesting character to me. You know, seeing him being an artist trying to make money. They didn't say that they were in Cabrini Green, but they were probably in Cabrini Green.
Yeah.
They were in the hood. They were in the projects, right? Totally. And so the whole piece was about the fact that, you know, they were trying to get out of poverty, you know, using the ways that they could, you know. And so he creates this character called Dino Man that wasn't successful. And then at the end of the show, the very last show, he creates this character called Dino Woman. Somebody in Chicago pays him enough money. I don't know who that was. I have ideas that gives him an advance that actually lets him get out of the hood and actually also like pay for a trip for Thelma.
Wow, that's incredible.
And I'm like it's called End of the Rainbow. And it's like so crazy. I'm like, wait, it's 1977. What the hell? First of all, like if you're not in New York, you're not gonna be in comics at that time, right? So what I did is I created a design fiction to figure out like if this guy was real and he sold that book to somebody, it would have to be Johnson Publications, a black-owned company out of Chicago, because he used to publish Ebony and Jet back in the day, right? That's the only, because whoever wrote that they didn't understand comics publishing. They thought it was like trade publishing, where you get an advance and you work against it. That's not how it works, right? We all know that your shirt you can be up in there like Jack Kirby, right? So we created an alternative history where J.J. Evans was a real character, and Dino Woman became a smash hit. And we created all these different iterations of her throughout the different ages.
That's so
because
cool.
she's an Afrofuturist construction that helped them get out the ghetto.
Right.
But they created it as a plot point. And then they didn't do anything with it.
This is why you're John Jennings.
I'm a big nerd. But I was like, who? Because I started thinking like, what? Because he goes to somewhere in Chicago. If you go watch the episode, Bookman, remember Bookman, the janitor? He dresses up in the costume and he goes down to this publisher in Chicago and sells this idea to a comic book publisher in Chicago that pays him enough money to be sustained. Ha! That is not comics.
No, not at all.
And they didn't know the business. I was like, this is so tripped out to me. You know, but it was a plot point. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
So what's the inception of the show look like for you?
Well, right now we're working on like artifacts for it, and we're just doing like different iterations and stuff. We're probably going to do some images of J.J. Walker as the cartoonist.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that'd be so
in
cool.
his studio.
Yeah,
you know
you can totally kayfabe it and make it like he was there like working.
Right, exactly. And so we're going to be like,
his author pick.
We're gonna have like blue line images, like redesigns of the character.
Yeah,
it's totally
so cool.
like totally made up.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
But it's interesting though because it's a point in history. Like, okay, yeah, I don't understand the history of comics, but what if it did happen like this? Because it talks about publication and stuff like that. Because Johnson Publication was a big business. You know, they're out of business now, but they were like a massive, and they were trying experimental publishing at the time too.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway.
It has like a what if
Yes.
vibe.
Yes.
to it.
Alternative. It's an alternative. Yeah. I love design fictions that happen in other dimensions. So
Yeah.
but that's what it is as a design fiction. It's what they call speculative design.
Right on.
Yeah.
So it's funny because I was only going to spend like a couple of minutes on this section, right?
But I'm sorry.
Because
but
it's not even John's work. We haven't talked about
we're
his
still
book
making
yet.
We're still making a dang thing.
Yeah, no, it's all good. So, John,
Yeah.
that was incredible. Thank you for that. By the way, at the end, we'll save questions for the end because I'm just as excited to ask a lot of questions.
I'm going to try to get them in fast.
It's all good.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to switch over the slide. But what I wanted to talk about real quick is about John, under Abrams, created an imprint called Megascope. And Megascope now has how many books technically out at this point, John?
Nine.
9.
Yeah. Oh, and we started like 3 years ago.
Yeah, which is incredible to get that kind of work out of talent. I'm fortunate enough to be one of the artists on one of the books.
God bless you. Because I
Thank
know
you,
y'all
brother.
worked real hard. We really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
we kicked butt to
Yeah.
get that done. You know, it was a lot of fun. It was like rock and roll. So, John, I'm going to switch over the slide, but can we start talking about the Kindred book
Yes.
and how that looks? And can you talk about what I want you to talk about or like hone in on is the process, because I just started working on the iPad and you've been working on the iPad.
Yeah, we didn't,
know?
I didn't do Kindred on the iPad. That was the last book I did by hand. Well, I did some of Box of Bones by hand. So essentially, like me and Damian Duffy, who's the co-adapter, we were getting ready to speak at San Diego Comic-Con for our other book, Black Comics, the first volume, and we were brought out to talk about that. Damian was like en route. He was in the air. And I was actually like walking around the floor, you know, with work samples of different things we were working on, including Blue Hand Mojo, actually. We were trying to find publishers for stuff we were doing. And we had actually already failed at an attempt to do an adaptation of Kindred.
Oh,
because
really?
people
Can we
don't realize,
talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, well,
'Cause
just for a
I think it's
second.
important to be documented.
Yeah, because Beacon Press has the rights to one Octavia Butler book, and that's Kindred. And so that's, Classic Press or whatever. They were trying to do a black and white, I think it was like only like 150 page adaptation, which is crazy to think of now,
Right.
of Kindred. And so they sent out a call for entries, and we found out about it late, and we murdered ourselves over a week. And we got a pitch in, because we both loved that story. And we didn't get it. And somebody else got it. And so we were like, okay, well, we tried our best, and we only had like a week for real. And I was like traveling. I was like traveling that week. So I was like doing pages and FedExing them back to Damien.
Wow.
Yeah, so I had 3 talks over a week. And I'd be like, I'll go to where and I'll FedEx them back to Champaign.
What year was this, John? Do you recall?
2000, it was like 2008,
Okay,
2009,
cool.
2008, something like that. And so what happened was we didn't get it. And I was like, okay, well, at least we get a chance to read whoever got it, And then when we were at this convention, I was walking around the floor and I came to Abrams' booth, and I had a copy of Black Comics with me. It's funny because and I've messed with her about this, but our editor Sheila Keenan at the time, they get approached by all kinds of people, right? And I was like, yeah, I was trying to see about how do I pitch to y'all, and she's like, well,
Yeah.
right? And I brought out Black Comics, which is a gorgeous book, It's very well produced. And so they're like, oh, if somebody spent this much money on this book, you got to be serious. So it changed her whole attitude. She's like, this is amazing. So then I showed her my work, and she's like, hey, you ever heard of Octavia Butler? And I'm like, yes, I have. Yes, I have. And so she was like, she's like, we're trying to do an adaptation of hers. And I was like, what book you trying to do? And she said, Kindred. And I was like, Kindred? It's like, okay. She said, yeah, I think your work would be perfect for this. And I was like,
You're like, oh, really?
I'm like, what? Yeah, so then what happens, I start seeing her like all over it's weird, like it became an omen. Like, there she is again. I kept saying it all over the weekend. And then when Damien gets there, I was like, dude, we might get a chance to do Kindred, man. He's like, what, Kindred? Yeah, I was like, yeah. And then 5 months later, we're hired to do an adaptation of Kindred.
That's
It
beautiful.
was wild. We just had to send in some pictures.
Did you send in your samples that you did previously? The same
No,
one?
no. I just sent in like current work because so at Abrams they really just have to understand like, are you a good storyteller? You know, what is the style you're going to be working in? You know what I'm saying? That kind of thing.
Yep.
And and so because she'd already decided that we were the team,
That's
all
awesome.
She had to get the sign off of the estate.
Well, it's good that I recognize that because it's one of those things
She
where
changed our lives. She changed them.
Yeah,
She changed
my
our
life.
lives.
Yeah. I'm here right now
She
with you,
changed
bro.
our lives.
Yeah,
She
a
was
lot
like,
of
no,
lives.
this is the people, and we worked so hard on that book, and and she's an excellent editor. She's retired now. Sheila Keenan. She's also a very talented graphic novel
Cool.
writer.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, she did this book called Dogs of War. Was nominated for an Eisner.
Yeah,
Anyway.
just nothing big.
Yeah, ain't nothing big. So,
So, John, I want to stick with it for a little bit, but just so that everyone understands the impact and the trickle-down effect. So, this is what kind of started the conversation over Megascope,
Yeah.
correct? That's what kind of built that
yeah,
relationship, right?
because what happened is like Charlie Kochman, who started Comic Arts, had never heard of Octavia Butler. He trusted Sheila.
Wow.
He trusted Sheila.
Wow.
He said, I don't know who this is yet, but I know that Sheila has a good sense of what could be a hit. So the book came out. It was #1 on a New York Times bestseller. It debuted at #1.
Yeah. It got
was
serious. It got serious real quick.
I was like, oh my God. Like it
got serious
it was,
quick.
it was just like, I can't even tell you because we worked so hard on that book. And then we sent in the first few pages, like the first 17 pages or so. And when the estate signed off on it, it was like, okay, go,
Wow.
And we worked very hard on that book. And then it came out at #1. And then we sent the book in. And I've been working as a graphic designer for many years, a long time, since I was like 22, right? Almost 53. I have never had a client not give me changes. They're like, this is Kindred.
That's amazing.
I was like, excuse me? She said, perfect, print it. We're like,
Wow.
what?
You're like, but I wanted to fix something.
But we weren't expecting changes, you know what I'm saying?
Right,
And it was
yeah,
like amazing. It was just nothing like that, And then we won the Eisner for it and the Bram Stoker, you know, and then we had to pick up whatever next books we were going to have. But at this particular point, the estate trusted us with her work, so because we showed that we knew what we were doing.
Right.
So we chose Parable of the Sword and Parable of the Talents because there were certain people that were entering to the White House.
Yeah, right.
And we're thinking some things are about to get really interesting, and there's a lot of things around Parable of the Sword, Parable of the Talents that actually reflect what's happening right now in our country. And there's even a character called President Jarrett who actually says the phrase "Make America Great Again." Because when she was writing about Jarrett, she was really writing about Ronald Reagan, who actually also uses that phrase in his early campaigns and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, and of course, if think Parable of the Sword, it's like the haves and the have-nots. It's like a very, very tense class thing happening. There's a lot of homelessness. It's after a pandemic, actually. There's a lot of fires. There's a lot of climate change, right, happening. I live in California, and fire is a season.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
when those winds come through, any fire will happen. So I had never seen anything like that before. The entire whole forest being burned up.
Yeah.
Fire tornadoes.
Never. That's insane.
That's a thing now, right?
Wow.
Because we're destroying our planet. So this is stuff that she it's almost like she had a crystal ball, and people this is one of the most prescient novels I've ever read. So after that, we got the Hugo Award for which is I'm still in shock of
We're
we
incredible.
won what?
Right.
Yeah, because it's one of the highest science fiction awards on the planet, right? And so
I known the Hugo since I was a kid.
right, it's
you see it on the books
we said,
all
oh,
the
that's
time.
important.
Yeah.
So and so after that, we were at ALA in the American Library Association in Chicago, and I was talking to our publisher at the time, Andrew Smith, over dinner about adapting other people's works, because Octavia Butler is phenomenal writer, but she's inspired so many other people like Nydia Corafor, Nalo Hopkinson, the list goes on and on. We want to say Tanana Reeve Do even, right? Stephen Barnes. So we were like, are there other places that we can actually adapt? And he was like, well, just let us know what you want to adapt, and we'll try to acquire it for you so you can do it. And I was like, well, I was thinking about original content. And he's like, oh, that sounds like an imprint. And I was like, Yes, it does. It does sound like an imprint. So like I did a white paper, as they call it, and I typed up like what Megascope could be. I called it Megascope because I don't know if you guys knew this or not, but W.E.B. Du Bois, the famous sociologist, from Harlem Renaissance, he also wrote science fiction. He wrote science fiction, and he created this thing called a megascope that could see into different dimensions. He wrote this science fiction story in 1909, 20 years before Hugo Gernsback coins the term science fiction.
Wow.
That's why it's called a Hugo, by the way. It's named after Hugo Gernsback. Anyway, yeah, and we were like blown away. So I was like, this is the perfect name for an imprint because it's about uncovering things that we don't know about, that we or like reshifting how we look at everything. Because I'm a huge fan of all of this stuff, right? But we're still underrepresented in these spaces. So Megascope is an imprint that is dedicated to looking at speculative fiction by and or about people of color. We look at crime fiction and we do historical fiction, and we're now getting ready to do our 10th book, which is called Devour, which is a Nancy the Spider horror story. And it ain't no joke.
So,
Yes.
John, I want to talk about the process with you and Damien.
Yeah.
What's the process of how do you do an adaptation? Because if you think about it, you make it sound easier. Like,
No.
this is I want this word and this
It
word.
is
I just
not.
did it, and
I
it's
didn't mean
here.
it. Please.
And
I
I
did
drew on
not-
paper and I turned it in. Now it's
no.
iPad. So, like, can you go into even if it's
painful.
just like
No.
do you take the book and then transcribe it, or do you like that whole process?
Generally, okay, so Damien, when he's working on Kindred, I think he read Kindred 14 or 15 times or so to understand every aspect of that book. Because when you look at it from the outside, it looks like it's a simple narrative, like she's going back and forth through time, No. There's times that she travels back that she doesn't really spend on, so you have to look at it as like he almost has to unpack it like a puzzle, because she's so terse with her words, and her words are so perfect as far as like they look like little diamonds. You can tell that she edits a lot, and it's very keen, very, very precise. Kindred almost feels like a play actually because it's so simple, but it's very, very like deceptive. It's very complex actually. So that's one thing. And then we had to think about, all right, so when you start adapting something, you're changing the very nature of how that story is to be told. Because just when you say, like, I'm going to adapt it to another medium, because each medium has a different set of affordances, that means there's a different set of things that those particular media can do, you're going to change the story. That's why I was like, it's not like the Fantastic Four that I grew up with. I'm like, yeah, but guess what? When you make it into a TV show, when you make it into a movie, it's going to have to change because the nature of how stories are told in different media, that's how it works, right? It's not a one-to-one ratio. You have to understand what comics do differently than prose.
Right. That's
The
a
other
good
thing,
point.
too, is that the original book is longer than a graphic novel. It's actually longer. So we had to collapse some characters. We had to be like, okay, this particular dialogue is saying something about this character. Does it need to be there, though? Is it redundant? We couldn't cut her words, actually, because we were like, who are we? Two cisgender hetero men, one white man, by the way, Damien's white, right? Cutting the words of one of the greatest science fiction writers to ever live, who happened to be a black woman, right? First science fiction writer to get the MacArthur Genius Grant, by the way, in history. A genius, for real. We're like, how dare we? How dare we? So Sheila Keenan, though, had no trouble cutting words. She's like, we don't need this, we don't need, because she's an editor, and she's very precise. She's like, this is what you need for
She's
this.
really good.
She's a very, very good editor, very good editor. And that she saved us. She really should almost have her name as a writer. That's how good she was at, and so understanding the core ideas in the story and then how they're going to translate to symbols. So we focused on stuff like we did cutaways, and comics are really good at diagrams, right? You can be reading a comic, remember you're reading a Daredevil comic and then Matt Murdock's house is cut in half and you can see him going from different floor to floor. Comics do that kind of stuff without taking you out of narrative because comics are descriptive and symbolic in that way. So that's stuff you can't really do. It'll take you out the whole narrative. If you do it in a movie, it feels like, why are we doing this? Right? And then also comics speak very symbolically. And the other thing, color was also a very important thing. That's something else too that you don't have. So when people read the book, sometimes people are like, this is the first graphic novel I ever read. I think this is the book. It's like, and actually it was heralded as probably one of the greatest adaptations thus far of literature.
Totally. Yeah.
Which is extremely humbling, but we just wanted to make sure that her words were at the top. Like we were collaborating with her.
Yeah.
She's
I mean,
not with us anymore.
it definitely reflects
She's been
that.
gone since 2000. Thank you, since 2007, I think. And but we wanted to make sure that her spirit is in everything that we do, and that our egos are in the back seat, and that it's about the story and making sure that whatever we do is servicing her vision. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay, so we have about, I would say about 15 minutes before I turn over to questions. I kind of want to talk about, John, the future of adaptations. So, and actually, maybe we could talk. Maybe there's something in your childhood that we can reflect on, because for me personally, the way I cut my teeth in drawing comics was through doing adaptations of short stories, because it's easier. Because just the process of writing at the time was difficult. So I would just take those Dover editions that were a book.
I remember Dover. Yeah.
And then I would like draw those comics, and some of them turned out pretty well. And so I'm curious about if you had any of that kind of development in childhood, one, and then the second half of that is where we're going to go. The next set of questions will be about the direction of the future. Like, where are you going? Do you see adaptations as being like a formidable, like a idea that is good to continue, or do we still follow under the philosophy of like, we're aping, like we can't write, so we adapt. Like the writing is priority over the comics.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of want to dive into that. But anything from your childhood that comes up as adaptations? Yeah.
It's funny because you can see like there were things that are adjacent. Like for instance, I was a huge fan of Popeye, and so I did like some Popeye fan fiction.
Yeah.
It was bad. It was like first grade, stuff like that.
funny.
And I think a lot of times you'll do things that are like aping or like mimicking stuff that you're into. You know what I'm saying? And so that's one thing. I do remember actually like trying to figure out like I was really into like the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. You know what I'm saying? So actually I remember drawing some things that kind of could have been illustrations of the stories, stuff like that. My mom was really into literature. She was a literature major at Alcorn State University. She didn't finish because she got pregnant with me.
Kind of had a little John.
Little John kind of disrupted that.
It's all good.
But she had like a lot of books around. I started reading at a super early age. I was really into the first time I remember reading like super early was Edgar Allan Poe. I was always into like gothic fiction.
Yeah.
My mom is still
those are adaptations.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. Exactly. And you know what? It's funny because even though I wasn't making them, those are some of the first adaptations I think I came across.
Yeah.
Now I think about it, was the Roger Corman Edgar Allan Poe movies actually. Like The Raven, I just love that movie.
Yeah.
It's a poem that gets turned into like this comedic with Peter Lorre. Have y'all seen that? The Raven. I think it's like Jack Nicholson's first movie too. Actually. So because Jack Nicholson's in it, and my mom is still a huge horror fan and really into gothic fiction and crime fiction. So a lot of like her influences on just me as the formative years, like she gave me my first comics and stuff like that. I was really into Norse mythology and Egyptian mythology, stuff like that. So those types of things were probably like feeding me. If I try to adapt things directly, but I was definitely exposed to them. You know what I'm saying? Like, Classics Illustrated, of course, and stuff like that. Or like Inger and Edgar Parent-Daller's book. Are you familiar with those books? Inger, yeah. The Dallaires were like not playing. They were a husband and wife team, and they did these massive editions. I see you shaking your head. That illustration style was so beautiful, and the two of them would do like Greek mythology and Norse mythology, and they were just beautifully illustrated. Bullfinch's mythology, of course. So I think for me, like illustrated fiction and trying to understand like how text translates into image was something that definitely did color the way I was raised. My mom actually had like a collection of like Poor Richard's Almanac illustrated by what's his name? Super famous illustrator. I can't remember. He was like one of the last great like superstar illustrators. What's his name? He did the Thanksgiving scene. Oh shoot. Norman Rockwell. Thank you. Yeah, Norman Rockwell. Yeah. Rockwell. That's right. He illustrated Poor Richard's Almanac. And
okay.
Yeah, it was a huge tome, and my mom had a copy of that. So those were probably my first things about thinking about how you actually take illustration and relate it to text.
Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah. So as far as like how I think about the future, Well, I mean, sales are dictating that adaptations are selling pretty well. They
Nice.
are, yeah, and that and like autobiographical comics, are still doing really well. Manga is always selling well.
Right.
So if you've been checking out the comic book trades, Abrams has decided to create a whole nother comics division. Up until recently, Abrams was like young readers and mature readers, right? And the comics side was under the young readers division. Abrams I think was bought by Media Participations, which is like a massive French publisher in like 2018. And one of their main things is, guess what? Bande dessinée, also known as comics, right? They're a huge comics publisher. They make Marvel look like they're just starting out. A massive media company. They're the third largest publisher of stuff in France, right? And massive. They're like, you know what? We need to push this market. So they've created a division that's just for comics.
Wow.
Yeah, and so they're going to be looking for new editors, new marketing, stuff like that. But they're bringing in a lot of adaptations. Like we just did our launch, and we're talking about like this amazing translation of The Road by Cormac McCarthy is coming out. I mean, I'll tell you, it looked like it's butter. It's beautiful. Whew. It's really nice. They're doing, what's the thing with the windmills? What's it? Don Quixote. Thank you. Don Quixote, right? They're also doing the Divine Comedy, Dante's Inferno, which looks like Dora came back from the grave and drew it. He's like, I'm back. It's gorgeous. I'm telling you. So yeah, we're gonna be doing more. Right now we just released The Last Count of Monte Cristo, which was a Afrofuturist adaptation of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. People forget that Alexander Dumas is of Haitian descent. He's a black man, and so and The Count is based on his father, who was a general with Napoleon's army, and so he's a Haitian general. And that's it. And so Afrofuturist takes place 200 years after the polar ice caps melt, so it's still a pirate story. So it's like somebody uses wind power and solar power, and it's off the coast of Africa, So yeah, but Tristan Roach is for Barbados.
Oh, nice.
Because we wanted to work with an artist who would be affected by climate change. Because he's on Barbados. So anyway, so we're doing more. We're doing an adaptation of The Middle Passage. It's by Charles Johnson, which is a really famous book for the 90s. Adapted by Reginald Hudlin and drawn by Dennis Cowan.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, it's coming along. Crazy. Yeah, so stuff like that we're planning. Yeah.
And so, John, before we turn it over to the audience, I do want to celebrate you because with having a kid and then being able to create a Marvel character is a really big deal because that's very symbolic, right? And it's like
it was odd.
A dream. So it's like you're probably still like pinch me, like is it real?
I'm still like, really? Yeah. Yeah.
So
I thought they were messing with me.
And we it was a few times ago when we spoke. We spoke on the phone for like an hour, maybe an hour and 20 minutes, and you walked me through Ghostlight and the inspiration for that. Yeah. Now, it doesn't necessarily fit into the narrative today of adaptation, but I think we could spin it a little bit because I want to get it documented. Okay.
So me and my friend Angelique Roche are hard at work on a book called My Superhero is Black. It's a directory of all of Marvel's characters of color in black, from like 1950 to current day. And it's kind of like a rough guide to all those characters. Now, Marvel has probably over 400 black characters, by the way. And you just don't see all of them, but there's a ton of them, right? From 1950 to current day is a lot, actually. So there's a lot of reading, there's a lot of research. And we got this assignment right at the beginning of the pandemic, right? And so we are reading hundreds of comics, trying to understand like why they were created, thinking about like the different decades and like how decade by decade, how media was affecting their creation, what was going on in popular culture, what was going on in politics, stuff like that, and how those things were happening. And we came across Al B. Harper. And I remember reading about Al Harper from back in the day. He's from the original 18 issues of the Silver Surfer, issue number 5, right? Al Harper finds the Silver Surfer after he's trying to get off the planet. This is when he's stuck on the planet, where Galactus has his former master had imprisoned him on the planet. and he can't get out because this force field is like attuned to his body, right? And I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of Black comic creators like the Silver Surfer, because there's a sense of estrangement, he's the strange creature in a strange land kind of thing, Even also too the fact that he's a walking mirror. I think a lot of people look, they see themselves literally in his body, that kind of thing. So he's a really popular character. He has a power cosmic, which is like space magic.
Right.
He's like, I have the power cosmic. It's like the Force. What is that? Anyway, so he bounces off the wall, and Albie Harper is like this innocuous, really beautifully drawn Black man. And what I mean by that is like when you're creating characters, you're using to some degree it's called physiognomy, where like the inside is reflected by what they look like. You know what I'm saying? So if you want someone who's evil, they're like, right? Mm-hmm. They're good. He's drawn like Luke Cage. Like he's handsome. He has a pipe. You know what I'm saying? He looks like he could be a superhero, right? So he's drawn to be a hero, right? And so he finds the Silver Surfer. He takes him back to the house, and he's like this random silver alien. What's up, brother? He's like, my former boss is tripping, right? He won't let me off the planet. And he happens to be a physicist. And he's like, you know what? I might have a solution. I'm gonna need a little money.
I got you, bro.
I'm a researcher. But he's in the woods, right? We're like, well, why is he there? What are you researching? Who are you working for? These things are not, he's a plot point. But here's the thing though, is that particular episode is called And Who Shall Mourn for Him? Which is from the Bible, actually. It's referring to the Messiah, and who shall mourn for him. So Al Harper ends up having to sacrifice his life, and he saves the planet from the stranger. And the Silver Surfer is so moved by this that he puts a cosmic flame on his grave to mark him as a hero for eternity. Now, I was like, that's a good story, but also like, why is he dead? Because the Fantastic Four got their powers from cosmic rays, right? So I was like, well, they bring back people all the time. So because Stan Lee wanted to talk about civil rights. This is 69. This is a year after MLK is assassinated, right? Civil rights is still jumping off. He wanted to talk about these things. If you read the story, it's very much about like the civil rights struggle, obviously, right? And he's using the Silver Surfer to do this. Some people are pissed off about it, believe it or not.
No surprise.
So I was like, in the middle of this, the George Floyd protests are happening. We've lost Breonna Taylor. We didn't know it, but we were about to lose Chadwick Boseman. I just lost my sister to a heart attack,
Yep.
And we're just surrounded by Black Death, And I think that Stan Lee wrote a Black Death story, Black Death Matters story. He was like, well, this Black man has saved the world. Do you care?
Yeah.
And I was like, I need him back.
Yeah.
And so Marvel was like, let's do it. And I was like, excuse me? I was like, wait a minute, you gonna let me bring this brother back and give him superpowers? Like, yes, let's do it. 5 issues, let's see what happens. And I was like, okay. So I call him Ghost Light because anybody in the theater, anybody ever do theater? What's the Ghost Light?
It's the one light you leave on so that, like, and then...
Really, so you won't kill yourself up in there. But it also symbolizes that the show will come back. Yeah. And so during the pandemic, all these theaters were out. They had the ghost lights on and nobody was going to the theater. So, so that's where the character came from.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Sorry, I was like, got like in my feelings.
Oh, no. That's
because I think, because like I said, I lost my sister around that same time. And I was like, I need this character back.
Yeah.
We had lost too many people,
Yeah, it's a beautiful redemption. So it is 1:45, 5 minutes left. So
I can talk all day. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's beautiful, John. So we're going to turn it over to questions. If we can project, just because it's recording, and then John, when you answer, obviously repeat back so that they can hear.
Okay.
And then I'll just dictate it. Go ahead.
So just real quick, when you were talking about cutting the words from Octavia Butler, how does that play into with the idea that some of the words you represent with the images?
That's right.
So you had that process also going at the same time.
Yes, yeah. So the idea of like, yes, you cut the words, but you also are replacing, words with images. This is totally true. Like for instance, there's a part where Dana is going to the plantation, and so instead of us describing what was happening with the plantation, we actually just did a map. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So we actually, if you open it up, it's a map, and you can see like the different parts what was happening. So you don't necessarily need all that text. You just need to be able to show a representation. There are some texts, for instance, where she's describing the home, right? So what we needed is to know what that house looks like. And so once you draw that house, then you've described it. You know what I'm saying? Stuff like that. So it's like things like that actually helped us like cut down on the text. But that's a great question, though. Yes, sir.
Question is, the Kindred, is that at the beginning, before she does the time travel part? Is she gonna be in the time set in the book, or is it gonna be more modern?
Oh, no, it's we decided to keep it in 1976. And we had that, that's a good question.
The series kind of ruined that for me.
Don't even get me started on that series. Oh, by the way, cut that out. Yeah, because that was, yeah, no, we decided that. And I actually, really quickly, before you go to the next question, that's a really interesting point, because how many people read the original novel, right? We don't know that Dana's black until the second chapter.
Well,
You know what I'm saying? In the book, in the original book, because she covers it up. She doesn't mention her race at all, and then you don't know until what's his name? I forgot his name right now. The main character. No, the little boy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He calls it the N-word, right? And you're like, wait, Dana's black? Get out of there now! That's when it becomes a horror movie. That's when it becomes a horror story. What's your second question? I'm sorry.
The Jimmy Walker thing.
Yeah.
You have to get special permission from either the producers or
It's fair use.
Jimmy Walker himself.
Nope.
Okay.
No. It's an art show. I'm not trying to publish it and make money. I'm satirizing
I
it.
want to read this.
Well, maybe we'll do it, and maybe we'll go through that stage when we get to it. Yeah. Well, Kendra does upstairs.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. That was it's been done. Yeah.
Find one today.
I'll try. I got to get two because we have 2 minutes, and then okay.
So when it comes to defining adaptation, is there a stringent rule for what that qualifies as though does translating into a foreign language identify as an adaptation of a work, or does it have to be more substantial than that?
Yeah, so that's interesting because I think it's a little bit different because when you're adapting something, I generally think about adapting to another medium. You know what I'm saying? But if you're doing like a direct translation, I think it's still the story. Because we have I think 8 translations of Kindred now in different languages, and it's still the same story. It's still same medium. But that horrible that TV show that let's just say that was a bad adaptation, because of choices that they made that I don't think service the story, So let's leave it at that. But so now if you're teaching like an adaptation class, you have these 3 different representations.
Craig.
Oh, the Craig was first, and then I'm sorry.
Where's
Okay, I just was wondering, as far as you approach an adaptation, obviously you read the book once, and.
I listened to the audiobook while I was making the work too.
Okay.
So I wanted to embody it. A lot of it's about embodying the story,
As you're making a project, you have to reread the project.
So many times, yeah.
How many times do you think that you had to gone back and read Kindred or listen to Kindred?
Oh, so I don't even remember, man. It's just like it became. I felt like I was trapped with Dana, and we both felt like we were time traveling with her, and it was such a painful process. And I had like literally crying at the board because of just how, because you think about it, you're re-traumatizing yourself every time. I'm sorry, you had a.
I just wanted to say, I got head injuries and I can't read, I became dyslexic, so
Oh, wow.
reading adaptations is how I read books now.
Yeah.
So,
We're going
I
to
just
do.
wanted to say it is accessibility issue also.
That's right, and we've been doing a lot. We're going to do more.
So I wanted to thank. We're going to go ahead and shut it down, John. Because it's time.
we got to.
So I wanted to thank everyone. I wanted to thank Craig for arranging this. So can we give a round of applause for Craig? Can we give a round of applause for John Jennings? And thank you, everybody. You've been amazing. And see you outside.
All right, thank y'all so much. Seriously. All right, so.